He was just trying to catch his flight, nothing more. Just a man with a ticket carrying his hopes for a simple journey. But the moment he stepped into the airplane cabin, the air changed. Whispers, stares, then a sudden, sharp command. He was not allowed to sit where his ticket said. Confused, humiliated, heart pounding, he tried to explain. "I have a ticket," he said, but the words fell like stones. The flight attendant sneered, calling him a liar, accusing him of things he had never done. Other passengers watched, some shocked, some turning away. He felt the weight of every judgmental glance, every sneer, every unspoken word, "You don't belong here." And then, the moment that should have been ordinary became a nightmare. A simple flight became a battlefield of pride, fear, and injustice. And as he stood there, powerless yet defiant, something inside him ignited, a courage no one saw coming. What happened next would shock everyone on that plane and expose a truth far bigger than one man's journey, a truth that still echoes in the hearts of those who face injustice every day. Would you have stayed silent, or would you fight back?
It was a bright Tuesday morning when 10-year-old Jamal stepped out of his small apartment, backpack slung over one shoulder, ready to head to the airport with his mother. Life hadn't been easy for Jamal's family, but they were careful, kind, and proud of every small victory. His mother, Latoya, had just finished her early shift and insisted they treat themselves with a little getaway, a short flight to visit relatives in another city. For Jamal, this trip was more than a vacation. It was a chance to see the world beyond his neighborhood, to feel a sense of freedom he rarely got. Jamal was full of energy, chatting non-stop about the cartoons he had watched that morning and the snacks he wanted on the plane. Latoya smiled, trying to keep up with his endless questions, but she noticed his excitement mixed with a hint of nerves. Traveling was always a thrill, but it came with layers of caution, lessons she had learned over the years about the world outside their small bubble. She reminded him to stay close, to keep his voice polite, and to be careful with strangers. Jamal nodded enthusiastically, unaware that strangers would soon include people in positions of power who would treat him differently because of the color of his skin. The airport was busy but ordinary, filled with families, business travelers, and the usual buzz of announcements echoing across the terminal. Jamal's eyes widened at the shiny airplanes lined up outside the glass walls. He ran ahead a few steps, pointing at his favorite plane, his laughter ringing through the lobby. Latoya called him back, gently scolding him to stay near. They checked in, got their boarding passes, and moved toward the gate. Everything seemed normal, routine even, comforting. But beneath the surface of this ordinary day, tension waited quietly. Latoya noticed the brief stares from some airport staff, subtle but sharp. She dismissed them at first, thinking she might be imagining things. Jamal skipped ahead, oblivious, clutching his little backpack. Neither mother nor son had any idea that the ordinary act of boarding a plane, something millions do without incident every day, would soon become a moment they would never forget. The conflict was looming, invisible yet unavoidable. An authority figure, a flight attendant, would soon step forward and challenge their right to be there. What should have been a simple verification of their tickets was about to spiral into humiliation, anger, and disbelief. For Jamal, this trip was more than a vacation. It was a chance to see the world beyond his neighborhood, to feel a sense of freedom he rarely got. For Latoya, it was a moment that would ignite a fire she didn't know she had, a courage born from indignation and love for her child. Every ordinary detail of that morning, the laughter, the excitement, the small jokes, was about to be overshadowed by a confrontation that would shake everyone who witnessed it. And as they approached the gate, neither Jamal nor Latoya could have imagined the ripple of fear, shock, and outrage that awaited them. This was the calm before a storm that would expose the harsh reality of racial injustice in the most public, humiliating way possible. As Jamal and Latoya approached the gate, everything seemed routine. The line of passengers moved forward steadily, boarding passes were scanned, and announcements echoed softly in the background. Jamal clutched his mother's hand, eyes wide with excitement, pointing out tiny details, the way the trolleys moved, the flight crew walking briskly down the aisle. Latoya smiled, her nerves hidden behind a calm exterior. She was proud of him, proud that he was so curious, so full of life, but she had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. When they reached the counter, the flight attendant's eyes flicked toward Latoya and Jamal in a way that made her stomach tighten. She smiled politely, handing over their boarding passes, but there was an edge to her voice when she spoke. "I'm sorry, but you can't board here," she said sharply. Latoya blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You don't belong in business class," the attendant said, her tone cold and dismissive. "This isn't for you." Jamal tugged at his mother's hand, sensing her tension. "Mom, what's wrong?" he whispered. Latoya kneeled down slightly, forcing a reassuring smile. "Nothing, baby," she said softly. "Just some confusion. We'll sort it out." But inside, she felt a familiar knot of anger and disbelief. She presented the boarding passes again, hoping the proof of purchase would end the confrontation. The attendant snatched them, scanning them slowly, her expression growing even more rigid. "No, this is wrong. You can't sit here. You must move to economy." Latoya's heart pounded. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I paid for these seats. I have every right to sit here. You can check the ticket. It's valid." The attendant's voice rose slightly, attracting the attention of nearby passengers. "I don't care. You stole this seat. You don't belong here," she snapped. Shock rippled through Jamal. His small hands clenched his mother's arm. "Why are they being mean to us?" he asked quietly, his innocent face clouded with confusion. Latoya's heart broke. She had hoped to shield him from moments like this, but there was no way to soften the sting of humiliation now. Other passengers began to watch, some whispering among themselves, some staring with wide-eyed curiosity. A few frowned, but most remained silent, unwilling to intervene. The sense of injustice in the air was heavy, suffocating. Latoya tried again, her voice steady but firm. "I have done nothing wrong. This is harassment. You cannot treat us this way." The attendant scoffed, waving her hands as if dismissing the law, the ticket, and common decency. "I'll call security if you don't leave immediately." The threat hung in the air, sharp and threatening. Jamal's eyes widened. "Mom, are they going to take us away?" he whispered, panic creeping into his voice. Latoya shook her head slightly, trying to maintain control. "No, baby, we're fine. Just stay calm." But inside, anger burned. How could someone in uniform, sworn to assist passengers, wield their authority to demean and discriminate instead? How could this be happening in a place meant for safety, order, and travel? The attendant pressed a button, and within moments, 2 security personnel appeared. Their presence amplified the tension. Latoya held Jamal close, feeling the protective instinct surge within her. "We have a ticket," she said firmly, her voice rising just enough to command attention. "You have no right to harass us." The officers glanced at the tickets, then back at the attendant. She whispered something quickly to them, her words sharp and accusing. One officer nodded, then looked at Latoya and Jamal with a faint air of suspicion. "Please step aside," he said. Jamal's small hand gripped his mother's tightly. "Mom, I don't like this," he said, his voice trembling. Latoya swallowed hard, her own hands shaking, but she bent down and whispered, "I know, baby, I know, but we're going to face this together."
As they moved aside, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Passengers pulled out their phones, some recording, some whispering incredulously. The humiliation was public, and the power imbalance was clear. Latoya felt the anger rising inside her, a heat that demanded action. She knew this wasn't just about seats on a plane. This was about respect, about dignity, about the cruel ways racism could appear in everyday moments. Jamal looked around, seeing the stares, hearing the accusations, feeling small and confused. "Mom, why are they being so mean to us?" he asked again, tears welling in his eyes. Latoya held him tight, her own voice breaking slightly. "Because some people are cruel, baby. But we won't let them break us. We won't let them win." The attendant stepped closer, her eyes hard, but Latoya straightened her back, refusing to flinch. "Call the police," she said firmly. "Do whatever you have to do, but I'm not moving." The crowd of passengers shifted, whispers turning to quiet gasps. Some seemed stunned, some afraid, some silently cheering her defiance. And in that charged moment, the ordinary airport scene had transformed into a battleground, a test of courage, of dignity, of justice. The tension was unbearable, every second stretching as if time itself held its breath. What would happen next? Would Latoya and Jamal be forced to give in, or would something happen to turn the tables? The answer hung tantalizingly out of reach, leaving every observer and every viewer on the edge of their seat.
Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander slowly through the dimly lit corridors of palaces, where things were gilded on the outside and deeply weird on the inside. You know, the kind of place where tapestries looked nice, but the people behind them were quietly losing their grip on reality. So get comfortable, maybe light a candle, and if you fall asleep halfway through, don't worry, the kings and queens won't mind. They've been dead for centuries. Now, mental illness in history is one of those topics that's both endlessly fascinating and deeply tragic. And if you were unlucky enough to be born royal, your breakdown wasn't just a personal problem, it was a political crisis. Imagine your dad talking to imaginary voices in the garden, and suddenly the fate of France hangs in the balance. Not fun. So, what did courts do when their monarchs went mad? Spoiler? They didn't call a therapist. They covered it up, or they doubled down, or they locked him away while insisting everything was fine. Let's start with one of the most famous cases in European history. A man who was King of France, nicknamed the Well-Beloved, for reasons that get more ironic the longer you think about it. His actual name, Charles VI, or if you prefer the tabloid version, Charles the Mad. Charles VI of France, born in 1368, was not supposed to become a tragic bedtime story. He was crowned at the age of 11, which is already a red flag, because who really wants a middle schooler in charge of France? His early reign was run by his uncles, 3 of them actually, who immediately began squabbling over money and power, which of course is exactly what you'd expect. If history has taught us anything, it's that royal uncles are usually bad news. But Charles grew up, took power for himself, and at first he wasn't so bad. In fact, he was young, handsome, energetic, and, wait for it, popular. People called him the Well-Beloved, which, if you know how this story ends, is a bit like calling the Titanic unsinkable. Things were going too well. The first signs of trouble came in 1392. Charles was in his mid-20s, healthy, ruling in his own right. Then, one day, while riding with his army, something just snapped. A page accidentally dropped a lance, and the clatter triggered Charles into a full-blown psychotic episode. He pulled out his sword and began attacking his own men. By the time they managed to restrain him, he had killed several knights. friends, not enemies. And just like that, France had a mad king on its hands. Now, this is where the royal court springs into action, which is to say they panicked, denied, and then started a decades-long cover-up. Charles would have episodes where he completely lost touch with reality. Sometimes he thought he was made of glass, literally. He wore reinforced clothing so he wouldn't shatter. Other times, he forgot who he was, insisting his name wasn't Charles or even that he had no name at all. Imagine being his servants. "Your Majesty, dinner is ready." "I'm not the king." "Right, okay, so not king. Your soup is getting cold?" The flight attendant hesitated, her carefully maintained air of control beginning to crack. The power she wielded was still real, but it was no longer absolute. Latoya could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. The security officers, too, paused, unsure whether to escalate or step back. Latoya felt her pulse hammering in her ears. Every second felt like a lifetime. And then, the unthinkable happened. One passenger, a young man sitting nearby, stood up. "She's telling the truth," he said firmly, holding up his phone. "Look at the ticket. She paid for business class. This is harassment." His voice carried authority, calm but unwavering. Other passengers began murmuring in agreement, their phones pointed toward the scene. The whispering grew louder, a chorus of disapproval aimed directly at the flight attendant and the security personnel. Jamal peeked out from his mother's chest, eyes wide with awe and confusion. "Mom, people are helping us?" he asked softly. Latoya hugged him tighter, a small smile breaking through her fear. "Yes, baby, people see the truth," she whispered. The attendant's face flushed with anger. "I don't care what anyone else says. I make the rules here." But her voice now sounded less certain, her authority no longer absolute. Security officers hesitated, caught between procedure and the growing outrage of witnesses. Latoya's voice rang out, strong and unwavering. "This isn't about rules. This is about respect, about justice. You cannot humiliate someone because of their skin color. This is racism, and it ends here." The words seemed to reverberate through the gate area, the weight of truth undeniable. The tension peaked, the moment hanging in perfect suspension. Every eye in the terminal was on them. Every camera lens pointed toward this small family, being forced to confront prejudice in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. Jamal's small hands clutched his mother's shirt, his breathing shallow but steadying as he realized that courage could be contagious, that even in the face of fear, defiance could shine. Finally, after what seemed like hours compressed into minutes, the attendant took a step back, her lips pressed into a thin line. The security officers lowered their hands, unsure of how to proceed in the face of mounting witness pressure. Latoya straightened, looking directly at the flight attendant, Jamal by her side, their resolve unbroken. In that moment, it wasn't just about boarding a plane anymore. It wasn't just about one ticket or one family. It was about standing up, about refusing to let the humiliation, the prejudice, and the fear dictate the course of their lives. The terminal, once a place of routine travel, had transformed into a stage where courage, dignity, and truth collided with ignorance, power, and hatred. Jamal looked up at his mother, his eyes wide and shining. "We're gonna be okay, right, Mom?" he asked, his voice small but steady. Latoya smiled, a mixture of exhaustion and pride in her gaze. "Yes, baby, we're going to be okay. And this is something you'll remember for the rest of your life. Not the fear, not the pain, but the courage we showed together." The attendant's glare lingered, sharp and bitter, but it no longer held the power it once had. The crowd's collective gaze, the undeniable truth of the tickets, and the courage of a mother and her child had shifted the balance. The climax of fear, tension, and injustice had reached its peak,
And for the first time, Latoya and Jamal could see a way forward, a way to reclaim their dignity and move toward resolution. And yet, as they prepared to finally board, a subtle, lingering question remained in the air. Would the injustice truly end here, or would the echoes of this confrontation follow them far beyond the airport gates?
At last, Latoya and Jamal were allowed to board the plane. Their tickets validated, their courage acknowledged, they stepped into the aircraft, exhausted but unbroken. Jamal's small hand remained tightly in his mother's, his wide eyes still scanning the cabin, trying to understand the storm of emotions he had just witnessed. Latoya took a deep breath, letting herself feel the relief, but also the lingering sting of indignity. This was over, for now, but she knew the echoes of that confrontation would stay with her and her son for a long time. As the plane took off, Latoya watched the clouds pass beneath them, thinking about what had just happened. She realized that this incident was not an isolated moment. It was a reflection of a deeper, persistent injustice that countless people face every day. What happened at that gate wasn't just about a flight or a seat. It was about power, prejudice, and the subtle ways discrimination seeps into the ordinary moments of life. She glanced at Jamal, who had finally relaxed enough to lean against her shoulder. He had witnessed courage in action, learning a lesson no textbook could ever teach. The experience left an indelible mark on both of them. For Latoya, it was a reminder that standing up, even when the odds are stacked against you, can make a difference, not just for yourself, but for those around you. For Jamal, it was a first-hand lesson in resilience, in recognizing injustice, and in understanding that dignity is never something to surrender, no matter how intimidating the circumstances. As they reached their destination, Latoya reflected on the larger meaning of that day. Racism isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides in uniforms, in rules twisted to suit prejudice, in moments that should feel ordinary but suddenly feel threatening. The story of their struggle was one that needed to be told, shared, and remembered, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a spark for awareness and action. And that is exactly what she hoped it would become. Every whisper of injustice, every act of courage can ripple outward, inspiring others to challenge discrimination in their own lives. Because silence, complacency, or turning away only allows these moments to repeat. So what will you do when you witness injustice? Will you stay silent, or will you stand? Will you let fear dictate your actions, or will you be part of the change that finally makes equality more than just a promise? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Talk about it, reflect on it, and consider how even small acts of courage can make a difference. And don't forget to leave a comment. Let us know what you think and how you would stand up against discrimination. Together, stories like this can open eyes, change hearts, and build a world where no one has to face fear and humiliation simply because of their skin. Because the truth is clear, injustice thrives in silence, and courage, like Latoya's, can change everything.